in Haiti, these voodoo people, there is a drug they can use which paralyzes anybody, and of course they have to be buried very quickly in the tropics because of heat. And so they are put in the grave, and they are hoiked out by the bad man in the middle of the night, and then there's a ceremony performed on them, and they regain their physical powers, but not their mental powers. They've completely forgotten everything to do with their life, and they're made to work in the fields. And that is a possibility, but I think a vampire is very unlikely as actually having happened.
Well, as I did some research on it, as I did The Vampire Lovers, I found out that they were actually an invention of the church at that time, in the Middle Ages.
Very interesting.
And the church invented this to keep the people under control, because fear keeps people under control. And because of that, they would make their servants do as they pleased, you know.
So, you mean...
It's a strict invention.
It's a kind of secondary
yes.
form of the devil. I mean, the devil had lost its effect, so they invented vampires.
Yes, that was they threatened them with hell and all that sort of thing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
What I was wondering was, if you, if you're playing Dracula or whoever, if you have any kind of, any body or anything to empathise with or identify with, other than other people who've been in horror films.
Played a sort of evil
Income man.
Let me tell you about Dracula today. I play a vampire, a modern-day vampire in the King's Road, so watch out.
I live now, though.
I mean, just at the beginning of the film, we see a party. You know, it's a party where we're having fun, and then suddenly everyone turns on me and they say that they're very bored with parties and all that sort of scene, and so I suggest black magic. Why don't I turn you on to black magic? And so we go to a church in Chelsea, and we have a ritual, a black magic ritual.
It's quite believable so far.
Which is very believable, and so it's modern day black magic and blends into a sort of modern day scene, and I think this will be very frightening.
Very.
It's only one step further then, you know, that in the film one takes it. It's only just that one step further. And surely that is really, I suppose, the strength of all these things that we do. It is only one step. It's not 18 steps further, like a lot of old science fiction films used to be. I mean, they've all been outstripped today.
Yes,
And
yes.
one
But now,
step.
who's to know that, you know, as long as it's only one step away, that's what frightens
It's all
me.
right.
It's the subtle step.
Just as the Devil Rides Out, I had a Sabbath on
the kind of idea that
Salisbury Plain,
Yeah.
which is one step beyond what is likely to happen.
Yes. Isn't as rare as people think today. I mean,
No.
you know, there are so many cases of desecration of graves and things.
You're really talking about a fundamental thing, aren't you, Michael? Please. You're talking about good and evil and how you interpret it in one form or another, whether it's vampirism, whether it's black magic, whether it's anything else.
Yes.
As we all know.
Well, they're all, every one of them is
Of
based
course.
purely on that slim dividing line between
Right.
evil taking
Of
over
course.
from good, yes.
Well, it's strictly symbolism, wouldn't you say? I mean,
Yes,
the strict
indeed.
case of vampirism is how people feed upon each other and on each other. And
Yes.
this viciousness that people feel against or for each other. And Dracula would stand for something, and Frankenstein would stand for another part of characteristics of people. In
I think
portraying parts
the
of
more one brings it to ordinary life, everyday life, I think the more frightening and the more realistic it could be. Because if one thinks about, if you see on the screen someone playing a vampire like an ordinary person you see in the street, and then you see the fangs, and then you think twice, you really think, oh Christ, is this guy? And you look behind you and is this person behind me? The more realistic, the more everyday it can be, the more subtly frightening.
Well, you know the other inbuilt thing you've got into this? There's, in all these, of course, there is the very heavy religious connotation.
Yes.
And I agree exactly with what Ingrid said earlier, that a lot of this was actually promoted by the church.
Right, the next one is The Horror of Dracula again, and this is the bit about research on vampires, Helsing and the Porter.
facts established. 1. Light. The vampire allergic to light. Never ventures forth in the daytime. Sunlight fatal. Repeat, fatal. Would destroy them. 2. Garlic. Vampires repelled by odor of garlic. Memo. Check final arrangements with Harker before he leaves for Klausenburg. 3. The crucifix, symbolizing the power of good over evil. The power of the crucifix in these cases.
Come in.
You rang, sir?
Oh, yes. I want this letter delivered first thing in the morning. Will you see to that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Anything the matter? What is it?
Well, sir, to tell you the truth, when I was outside, I thought I heard you talking to someone.
Well, of course you did. I was talking to myself. You won't forget that letter, will you?
No, sir. Yes, sir.
The power of the crucifix in these cases is twofold. It protects the normal human being, but reveals the vampire, or victim of this vile contagion, when in advanced stages.
Established that victims consciously detest being dominated by vampirism, but are unable to relinquish the practice, similar to addiction to drugs. Ultimately, death results from loss of blood, but unlike normal death, no peace manifests itself, for they enter into the fearful state of the undead. Since the death of Jonathan Harker, Count Dracula, the propagator of this unspeakable evil, has disappeared. He must be found and destroyed.
Don't forget, this was the first of the Dracula films that Hammer had made, and so all the garlic flowers and all that sort of thing was new, as far as we were concerned, was new to the audience.
So all this about
This is something we had to put up and explain. Now you don't even have to explain. You hate a garlic flower.
So in that first
No,
film,
don't, you're in
The
trouble.
Horror of Dracula, you're at great pains to make clear to everybody, when the guy says research on vampires, exactly what a vampire was all about. You had to explain why
Right.
the garlic was in the room.
Right.
Well,
Now
we
you-
still do. Let me just correct Jimmy on this, Jim. Even today now, particularly in the modern one, but even in upcoming ones, it's still necessary
You
because of that
remind-
new audience that I
You
talked about.
remind them or
And
tell
you,
them,
well,
yes.
you reassure them.
Yes.
Well, you see, if you analyse all these movies, and I'm not suggesting we've got the time nor the computer to do it, but there are standard scenes in every Dracula film
Yes, like
that
the
they are an
carriage.
essential. You block them in first, and you write your story around that. You must have them
which
under
are
the new
the
circumstances.
essential scenes of the stake
Well,
room?
you've just
through the heart?
talked about one, which is setting up the scene of how you can dispose of a vampire. Also, as Terry said, you must let the audience know that when you drive the stake through the heart of some and not others, depending on why they have been vampirized, it's either a relief or a killing. Then you have to have the scene of the relief or the killing. I mean, there's a whole set of circumstances.
Another one I've noticed is the Latin priest reciting the exorcism or the Latin words or whatever. This is again one, which you repeatedly use as a standard device.
Well, again, it is part of the whole thing. Although there's a funny point here, I must say, for years and years and years, where the Catholic influence has been so strong in all these horror films, it's only lately that in the Catholic countries they have accepted horror films, where they really, for years and years, have had the biggest propaganda they could possibly have bought.
when they were the
Because of that
people
religious
started.
element.
Well, they haven't quite understood them for some reason. I mean, recently, 2 of our biggest successes have been in Ireland. Because
Well,
horror
of course,
films
I
have
would
not
think
been
that
allowed in
Ireland-
there for years and years and years. But if only they'd
Ireland
understood
Cross.
them at the beginning, they should have been the first films
Yes.
in there. They're tremendous for
Couldn't agree
them.
more.
Yes, they thought they were
Harold
sacrilege
Cross.
when
I like
they
to
were
say-
quite the
I'd
contrary.
like to
My
say
books,
this
you see,
clear.
they banned
Right.
it.
Hold on, hold on. Les,
This is Enid Blyton for the grown-ups, I tell you that.
Another very strict ingredient in all the approaches to this type of thing is the class struggle. All of them. Dracula lives in a castle on the hill, snatches little girls from the village. The villagers can't do anything about it. Baron Frankenstein is another land baron. There is a tremendous thing. All
That's
these
right.
films,
We've got
all
a-
these stories almost end, always, inevitably, with the villagers, whether the cross is carried or not. I mean, we've covered that already. But it is the little people who eventually
That's right.
vanquish
And there's
the
one of your
bloodsuckers.
there's
Now,
one
the
of your-
blood sucking isn't necessarily physical. It's out of the sweat of their brow, etc., etc.
And there's one of your
Yes,
films
that's
which
very
actually starts
interesting.
off with somebody being asking the countess who's riding by for work.
Countess, your husband promised me work.
Be off! Away with you!
My wife and boys are starving. In God's name, he promised. He promised. Down, down, come on.
When are you going to do a film about Gilderay, Michael?
Well,
Bluebeard.
That's a quote for you.
Can you tell us about Bluebeard, Dennis?
Well, Bluebeard, Gilles de Rais was, lived in the time of Jeanne d'Arc, and he became her champion when she started to fight for the Dauphin of France against the British. And he became Field Marshal of France. He was very rich, he was quite young, and when he left the war and he went to his castle, he kept so many retainers because he had to start selling his lands. He wanted money. And so he got various people from Paris, who were supposed to be witch doctors and magicians and so on, and set up a whole wing of his castle, doing nothing else but practice his black magic. And when he was executed, but out of the moat they dug up the bodies of over 100 children that he had murdered. He was the greatest Satanist, perhaps, of all time.
Yes, and when you would portray such a character as an actor, then you would try and find out why did he despise children? What was wrong with his own childhood? Well,
It was a matter of sacrificing a child to Satan. That's the point. And see, if you can get an unweaned child, all the better, all the more welcome is the blood to evil forces. That is the tradition that has gone down through all time.
Is this history? I mean, is this
Oh, of course it is. Oh,
is
yes,
fact?
indeed it is. Yes. Oh, yes. Definitely there are Satanists of power, like Aleister Crowley undoubtedly was. But they're very few and far between. And most of this modern stuff is for kicks. But, of course, it's very dangerous because it does open the minds of young people to evil. And also, there's no doubt about it, that from the very beginning of witches' sabbats, they always used drugs. And these so-called covens now are used for drug pushing.
How do you draw the line between them just being powerful people and witches? How come one
The point is this: to become really powerful Satanists is a very, very hard job of work indeed, because you've got to study the job for years. To do the job, you've got to have the tools of the trade. And it may sound simple enough when you want a dagger and a chalice and this, that, and the other. But you've got to make them yourself. Not just buy them. Not have them second hand, because somebody else's influence may already be in them. And you've got to have any amount of these sort of things and procure very rare herbs. You've got to devote yourself to it. Just as fakirs in India devote their whole lives to achieving what they believe to be communication with God.
But I mean, you write about it. Do you believe in it?
Of course I do.
But would the chairman of
But Dennis has
ICI,
researched it all
would the
his
chairman
life,
of
isn't it?
ICI
Yes.
or Edward Heath be a better head of a company or better politician if he was a Satanist? I mean, better, by that I mean powerful. I mean, would he control people better to do things that he wanted to do?
He might temporarily, but the devil doesn't look after his own. The thing is, there are two, in my belief, there are two invisible influences of the world, that of light and that of darkness. And in light, everything grows, budgeons, blossoms. In darkness, everything dies and decays. And in any part of the world, there's an equal amount of light and darkness during the course of 1 year. And you have these two powers, from the very beginning of time, who have been warring. Why? We don't know. Any more than we know what eternity is. But they have been warring, and you get these ages of light when you get a great teacher like Jesus or Muhammad, Confucius, Buddha, and then you get these ages of darkness like the Middle Ages.
Dennis, we can all sit down and list a whole number of people who are the teachers of light, who have survived,
Yes.
and their names are household words. Who are the true teachers of darkness?
People like Borgia, some of the popes, innumerable bishops.
But all of those
practice
you
black
can
magic.
put down to personal gain, can't you?
Put
They-
down
they-
to
in
personal
other words,
gain.
you invent something
Okay,
that hasn't
you
got
see,
the lasting
the
powers.
The theory is this, that God the Father, through Lucifer, who incidentally was the son of the morning, the beautiful angel, out of heaven, and he gave him earth as his province. And you'll find in the Bible, they will tell you that Christ was taken up into a high mountain by Lucifer, who showed him all the provinces of the world and said, "All this will I give unto thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me." Christ refused. Well now, how could Lucifer do that if it wasn't his to give? And so, you see, these people who believe in black magic and witchcraft, they hold the theory that this earth is Lucifer's province. And so if you pray to him and follow him, then he can give you anything in this world.
How do you relate somebody like Charles Manson to it?
Oh, well, of course, he obviously was a practitioner of the black art, but I would not say a powerful one. I don't know. All I do know that when the police rang me up and asked me what I thought about these murders, I said at once that I thought they were black magic murders. And I tell you why. Because they had ropes round their neck. But they were not hung. They had been stabbed or shot. They hadn't been killed that way. And it's one of the kind of symbols. And when in the old days witches were captured and put in prison, other sort of their covens used to break in and strangle them. It's a well-known thing, and if ever they kill, they always tie a bootlace or something round the neck. And directly I heard those people had ropes around the neck, I said at once, black magic.
The police actually rang you up and asked you?
Oh, yes, indeed they did. So they did about this
I'd
thing
like to
in
bust in
Jersey.
here.
They rang me up about that too.
I like to break in and look at it from a real, like I'm a special effects man and I pump blood and I turn wheels and I like to turn ordinary life into something. I don't believe like you do at all.
You don't? No.
If Christ was born today, no one would believe him.
No, but he would do
yours.
things to prove his presence, as he did when he was here, first of all. He
And he'd
made
do
some
it in
very
our way.
dramatic special effects,
Oh,
didn't
yes,
he?
I'm sure.
I mean,
If
some
I
of them,
might
I
say-
shudder to say this, but better than yours.
Okay,
You
Les,
find them?
first.
No, I tell you what, just recently we made a head that looks absolutely horrible and it effervesced with as if being eaten away by acid. And I found that not only I, all the others, we all knew it was made of nice edible things and all the rest of it. Nothing horrible in it, and it looked so vile, and we thought, oh God, who's going to pick it up? And not one volunteer went forward to pick this very honest bit of
Special effect.
Don't give away your secrets. Don't tell us what it was
ground up
made of.
effervescence, and it did look horrible, and nobody wanted to pick it up, and if one fly had come in, I swear somebody would have been sick. That's the end of that.
Angharad.
Well, I think I've only done one horror film, actually, so I'm quite new to it. But quite a few times, once I arrived early on the set, I watched a girl who had been killed by me, in fact, the day before, but do her slight dance of death. And that frightened me very much.
Jimmy,
In the
has there
making
been
of a
anything
film-
which has made you suddenly stop and think,
Yes,
wow.
when his leading lady was late.
Right. No, not in not in films. No. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I know what I hope will give a frightening effect, and if it's done properly, and by the time you've cut it and put the music on it, then if it can still frighten you, the person who put it there, then it's worked. And yeah, I can still find this. I can still find shocks. I plan a shock effect in a picture, and I will still be frightened of it. I'm frightened. I know it's coming up, but it can still give me that sort of shock of fear.
You should be proud if you felt that it shocked everybody else.
Well, if it shocks me,
yes.
who knows it's
Yes,
coming up,
indeed.
I know
That's
it's
right.
going to shock everybody else.
Yes, indeed.
Chris,
when I was performing the Sabbat in Dracula today, I was up at the altar and there was tremendous quiet, and I had to cut my wrist and pour blood into this goblet that contained Dracula's dust, which frothed up over Caroline Munro's body. And this looked really terrible. I was very frightened doing it, really. I was involved, I was doing it, and I was putting everything I got into it, and I felt very exhausted at the end. Then when the director said cut, there was total silence, and I walked away off the set. There was silence. No one talked to me. No one looked at me. This was very, very frightening. Now, the reason why people didn't look at me or talk at me might have been because they thought I was the worst actor they'd ever seen. Or it had been very convincing. I don't know which, but it made me very frightened.
Ingrid
Well, I
Pitt.
don't know. It's just something that Peter Cushing did, which I can't quite forgive him. Every time I see The Vampire Lovers, the way he cuts my head off, I don't like it. And I feel it every time, and it's terrible. And the stake goes into here, and I don't like it going into just there. You understand, Mike?
No, I only want to put Hammer's point of view is that we would never have let Peter Cushing cut Ingrid's head off if we hadn't had two to start with.
When Dr. Phibes came out, everybody said, aha, we've got a new horror archetypal image, Dracula, Frankenstein, and now Dr. Phibes. I can't really see that happening. Do you think we are just going to stick to Frankenstein and Dracula, or is something else going to come along? And are we going to see any much more horrifying things? Are we going to see real violence, maybe? We've already had sex in the horror
You're
movies.
seeing real violence. I mean, Mr. Peckinpah is the greatest exponent of real horror. I think that, there are many directors working in fields of horror, many stories that are far stronger than ours.
Does that mean, though, that with things like the Straw Dogs, if they're going to have violent scenes in them, that they're going to catch up on horror and out-horrify?
No, I don't think they are for a moment. I agree
Michael.
with you, they will out-horrify. I mean, they will give you that moment of real nausea in the cinema.
You're talking about physically now.
Yes,
Are you?
totally physically,
Well,
because
I'm not talking
they're not
about
necessarily
physically.
expecting
Mentally,
this.
We are just... Sorry.
Michael.
No, my point there was that you go in to see these films, and I mean, I remember the Western that Peckinpah did too. I mean, there are certain things we hold dear that suddenly you're shocked out of your seat by some new approach by a film or a director. But I think, in a way, this is going to strengthen the horror film for where it stands, because this is something that you can go in, you can have your adrenaline titillated, But when you come out of it, you're not going to expect to have something like that happen to you on the way home. This is where I think we stand apart from the contemporary horror.
Yes.
In other words, the real horror, oh dear.
Let me do it for you. Hammer horror.
Thank you very much. It's much more reassuring in a way.
Oh yes, I mean, if we're really going to have a discussion about horror, I don't think that Hammer are even in that field. We do a gothic form of horror film.
It's mental horror,
which is
wouldn't
safe.
you say?
And may I tell you another quick point why I think it's going to continue is that because of the censorship in most countries, you also get a new audience every year or year and a half. You get a completely new. And we've covered this point before, but you must not change the format for the new audience. They want to see exactly what their parents saw, what their grandparents saw, because they haven't seen it. And if you muck about with that legend, you're dead.
Yeah.
Mary Shelley.
She wrote the story.
She
She
had
wrote
the
the
family
Frankenstein
bard.
story to win a competition. I
She had
think.
the family
I'm
bard.
going to do a film next, playing Mary Shelley. strangely
Playing
enough.
Mary Shelley.
Yes,
Really?
in a film about Byron and Shelley, written by Andrew Sinclair. And in the film, it takes us. I don't know whether it's a new angle, it might be an old idea, but the fact that the stories of Frankenstein she wrote were in fact an interpretation of her life at the time, and Byron was in fact
Let me look at you.
Frankenstein.
Because I'm going to murder you. Because I'm on the special effects, I think,
Oh, well, we'll talk about it after. And that's very interesting, because in actual fact, Frankenstein was barren in her eyes, through her own mind, her interpretation of her life at the time.
But
And all
meaning,
the other
meaning Dr.
characters-
Frankenstein, who created the monster. as
Yes.
well.
Well, they had spent a few years together, Byron and Shelley, Mary Shelley, another woman called Claire Clairmont. And if you look carefully into the stories of Frankenstein, you can see all those characters there.
What we've done up to now is nothing. It's nothing to what we will do. We've only just started, just opened the door. Look, now's the time to go through that door and find what lies beyond it. Why, don't you see, Paul? We've discovered the source of life itself, and we've used it to restore a creature that was dead. Now, this is a tremendous discovery, but we mustn't share it yet. We must move on to the next stage. We've restored life where life was extinct. It's no longer sufficient to bring the dead back to life. We must create from the beginning. We must build up our own creature. Build it up from nothing.
From what? Why, what on earth are you talking about?
Forget the whole. Now we must take the part. Limbs, organs, and then we must build.
Build what?
The most complex thing known to man. Man himself. We must create a human being. A man with perfect physique, with the hands of an artist and with the matured brain of a genius. We can do it, don't you see?
No, I don't. Oh, what you're saying is nonsense. A revolt against nature. Such a thing could only end in evil.
Oh, come with you. You haven't shown any scruples up to now. And as for revolting against nature, well, haven't we done so already and succeeded? Isn't the thing that's dead supposed to be dead for all time? Yet we've brought it back to life. We hold in the palms of our hands such secrets that have never been dreamed of. Our nature puts up her own barriers to confine the scope of man. We've broken through those barriers. There's nothing to stop us now.
Well, don't forget now, this was the first of the Hammer horror films. The very first. 12 years ago? It's got
more than that.
Longer than that.
It's nearer 15.
It's the very first of the Hammer horrors.
But this one here is as concise a statement as I could find of the whole, the way Frankenstein relates to people's worrying about what science is going to do to everybody. Was that in the back of your mind when you wrote it?
Yes. Yeah.
This was.
If he convinces you, he's not convincing me.
No. Well, of course it is.
Yeah.
Well, this is again from The Curse of Frankenstein. You can have a look at this one again.
Pass the marmalade, will you, Miss Smith? Thank you.
Victor,
Mm-hmm.
I'm worried about Justin. You know, it's a week since she went away, and we still have no word from her.
I told you not to worry. I expect some village Lothario eloped with her. She always was a romantic little thing.
That's a pass the marmalade line. Yeah, well, this is a favourite thing of mine with horror films, and I think it's very important. Is you must, and Terry, I think will agree with me, is you must give the audience a point to laugh. You must give them that release to laugh.
You want them to laugh with you and not at you.
Right, because if you don't give them a chance to laugh with you, then they will laugh at you.
Sure, you're right.
And this is another way of bringing real people in, isn't it?
Oh yes,
always with you, but never at you.
And I remember seeing that, and that brought the house down. That, all he said was pass the marmalade.
Yes.
You can't get much more real than that every day.
But he just sort of done the most diabolical things to his housekeeper.
I'm going to take credit for myself now. That was halfway through the scene, Jimmy. Right. No.
Right. The next one is the horror of...
If we haven't used the other half, could I have it for another film?
No point. No, this is it.
The next one is the horror of Dracula. It's just simply somebody driving a stake through Dracula's heart.
Yeah, well, Terry did that.
You did that.
So what?
He did all the beastly things to everybody in our films.
You must do it now.
When you're driving a stake through when you're driving a stake through somebody's heart.
Was it John Van Eysen's, wasn't it?
How much do you stick, with the idea of driving a stake through somebody's heart? How much do you stick to the original, the genuine factual legend where certain rituals need to be performed with the garlic flowers?
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. This is very important if you're making a vampire film. This is. I do not agree that one can do everything by suggestion and implication. There comes a moment, particularly in vampirism, where this is the method not of killing the vampire, but of releasing him.
Yes, that's right.
And you have got to show the release of him. Brutal though it is. It's a release, not a killing.
Is there no other way? But it's horrible.
Please try and understand. This is not Lucy, the sister you loved. It's only a shell, possessed and corrupted by the evil of Dracula. To liberate her soul and give it eternal peace, we must destroy that shell for all time. Believe me, there is no other way.
Chris, are you aware in playing a vampire of any, of anything that's using that to play a vampire? Anything that you've noticed in people around you, or any kind of quality that psychiatry has discovered, or whatever?
Yes, I suppose so. I mean, one uses when one plays a vampire. I mean, it's such an unknown quantity that you try and put yourself into it and bring as much as yourself as you can into it.
I'm